The UK is in crisis. Since 2020, immigration has exploded. More than 4 million people have entered the country, marking 3 consecutive years of record highs. Well over half of all Britons want this number to come down, and it has risen to become the #1 issue amongst voters in 2024. So why isn't anything happening? Part of this is because behind the debate and the news headlines is a story far more shocking. The situation hasn't just been mismanaged, it's been exploited. At the expense of the taxpayer, a few secretive companies are turning Britain's asylum system into a £1 billion goldmine. They've pocketed billions in government contracts with little accountability and profits that keep rising. One company at the heart of the crisis, ClearSprings, made £1.3 billion in 2023 alone, more than the entire Travelodge hotel chain. And what are the taxpayers getting for their money? Overcrowded facilities, squalid conditions, and stories of despair. In the first 5 months of 2023 alone, 14 suicide attempts were recorded at just one accommodation centre. Yet these companies face no penalties, no fines, and no real scrutiny. Despite only 1 in 4 properties passing basic inspections, they're handed lucrative government contracts year after year. Britain has grown used to scandals, from COVID contracts to Partygate, but this might be the most shocking yet. In 2025, Britain is set to welcome its first asylum billionaire, while over 10% of the population struggles to afford basic meals due to the ongoing cost of living crisis. So how did we get here? Why is Britain's asylum crisis being treated as a business opportunity? And how have a handful of companies been allowed to profit while the system crumbles? To understand how private companies have turned Britain's immigration system into a £1 billion industry, we first need to go back in time. Immigration in the UK wasn't always like this. In fact, it used to be under control. By the 1950s, Britain's once vast empire was fading, and severe labour shortages caused by World War II prompted large-scale migration from the Caribbean, South Asia, and India. These migrants filled crucial workforce gaps and enriched British society, establishing the country as a destination for economic migrants seeking better opportunities. To be clear, opposition towards migration in the UK has always been a factor at some point, but in recent years the story around migration has changed. A growing number of asylum seekers, fleeing war, persecution, and instability in their home countries, have turned to Britain for safety, and since 2010 this number has steadily grown, but a shift came in 2016.
The British people have voted to leave the European Union, and their will must be respected.
When the UK voted to leave the European Union, one of the promises made was to take back control of immigration and borders. On paper, leaving the EU would end freedom of movement between Britain and Europe and drastically reduce the number of EU migrants coming to the country. But like any other decision, this created an unintended consequence. As legal pathways for migration were restricted, more people turned to irregular routes to seek asylum, and one way in particular has caught headlines.
Latest Home Office figures show more people have crossed the English Channel in small boats so far this year than in the whole of 2023.
In 2024, the UK has witnessed over 100 people arriving via small boat every single day, with an estimated 40,000 people coming in just this year alone. Since 2020, the number of people who have entered the UK illegally is well clear of 100,000. For many Britons, the small boat crisis has become a symbol of a broken immigration system. In the past, Britain managed asylum seekers more effectively, with arrivals housed in designated centres or dispersed across communities. This approach balanced support for asylum seekers with local integration, but as numbers grew, the system failed to keep pace. The process of reviewing asylum claims, which once took months, began dragging on for years, and by 2023, the backlog had swelled to over 175,000 cases, the largest in UK history. Faced with an unmanageable crisis, the government shifted its focus from long-term planning to short-term fixes. relying on temporary accommodations that were never designed for this purpose. This scramble to manage the growing backlog created the perfect opportunity for private companies to step in and profit. What happened next would transform Britain's asylum crisis from a national challenge into a multi-billion-pound industry. Before we dive into this, I just wanted to say a big thank you to today's sponsor, Odoo. Thanks to all your support as viewers, we have grown this channel into a small business where we can use Odoo, an all-in-one management software that provides a range of applications to simplify the day-to-day management of your business. The first application is free for life with unlimited hosting and support, and if you want to use 2 or more, then you can switch to the paid plan. Running a YouTube channel requires a lot of work for all our videos, but to make sure I can manage everything more efficiently and on time, I can use Odoo's project app. For this video, I created a project where we can track each of the steps, like writing, sourcing data, and editing. I created tasks and assigned people and deadlines. Within each task, I can send emails, quick notes, attach files directly from the chatter, or even schedule activities like calls, meetings, or to-dos, all directly linked to the task. I can also select from a number of different views to find the one that helps me stay organised. Personally, I like the calendar view because it gives me a clear visual overview of all our deadlines and schedules of the project. But there are also other ones, like the Kanban view and the Gantt view, that helps me visualise dependencies and plan dates. Odoo helps me keep everything in one place and makes teamwork effortless. If you want to try out your first application completely for free, you can click the first link in the description or the pinned comment. Some asylum accommodation has always been private in Britain, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing. But as Britain has accepted more and more people, the government has simply run out of space in the state sector, allowing the private sector to balloon and exposing a real dark side. Funds going to these companies started small, but it didn't take long for this to change. Outsourcing seemed like a practical solution. By partnering with private contractors, the government could avoid the upfront costs and delays of building new facilities, and contractors could quickly secure existing housing, hotels, repurposed military barracks, and even office buildings, while providing basic services like food and maintenance. This approach promised efficiency and flexibility. But instead of solving the crisis, outsourcing created a new one. Contractors scrambled to find accommodations, often turning to unsuitable or poorly maintained buildings. By 2019, contracts worth £4 billion had been handed to just 3 companies: Serco, Mears Group, and Clear Springs Ready Homes. And this has only gotten bigger. In the last year, the UK government has spent more than £5 billion on asylum, an increase of more than 30% from the previous year. These firms were tasked with managing housing and support across the UK for asylum seekers, but with little oversight and competition, they've been gifted the perfect opportunity to consolidate what was once a public responsibility into a profit-driven model. Without anybody to keep check on them, the focus shifted from improving conditions to managing costs. This decision set the stage for a system plagued by inefficiencies, poor living standards, and rising profits for private companies. The number of facilities used to house asylum seekers is vast, from disused army barracks to even a floating barge. But at the heart of the system is hotels. In 2023, over 35,000 asylum seekers were living in hotels, costing British taxpayers £6 million every single day. While some were housed in chains like Holiday Inn or Britannia, others ended up in run-down establishments, booked by middlemen. The system is shrouded in secrecy and shady deals, but at the heart of this transformation is one man whose fortunes epitomise the staggering profits made in this broken system. For decades, Graham King was just another businessman in Essex, but this all changed again in 2019, when his company Clear Springs Ready Homes secured a massive government contract to house asylum seekers in southern England, Wales and London. And since 2019, Clear Springs revenues skyrocketed, growing over 20 times, from £60 billion to well over £1.3 billion in just a 4-year period from 2019 to 2023. And it's clear to see who this has benefited. In 2024, King entered the Sunday Times Rich List with a personal fortune of £750 million, earning him the nickname the Asylum King. If this story was about hard entrepreneurship, then perhaps his achievements would have been well received. But what makes all of this more shocking is that ClearSpring's wealth was built almost entirely on government money. The company relies on just 2 Home Office contracts for the bulk of its income, meaning nearly every pound of profit comes directly from taxpayers. And the profits were staggering. ClearSprings reported £90 million in net profit in 2024, a sharp increase from £60 million the year before. While it's controversial that the UK taxpayer pays such eye-watering fees to house migrants, what's even worse is how these companies are run and the service they are providing. To keep squeezing out profits, the company has secured contracts for controversial sites like Napier Barracks and Wethersfield, despite repeated complaints about the conditions. Like the other asylum companies, their success is based around a lack of public accountability. Everyone in the UK knows about the number of small boats arriving, but very little is known about what happens after this. And this lack of public accountability is partly by design. ClearSprings keeps a very low profile, often refusing to give interviews or do any sort of media appearance, but some details can't be hidden. ClearSprings properties consistently fail Home Office inspections, with only 27% deemed compliant and 15% classified as uninhabitable. But despite this, no penalties have been enforced. While the government has a profit share agreement meant to return excess earnings, no money has been paid back either to the Treasury, leaving British taxpayers to fund ClearSpring's exponential growth. It seems when it comes to some areas of the country, both the government and the companies receiving the contracts would rather some things go unspoken. For the tens of thousands of asylum seekers placed in government-funded accommodations, arrival in the UK is far from the safe haven they had imagined. Instead, many find themselves in environments that echo the trauma they fled: overcrowded, unsanitary, and isolating. Take Napier Barracks, a repurposed military site near Folkestone. In the winter months, residents shivered in poorly heated homes, while damp walls and faulty plumbing underscored the site's neglect. Inspectors later described it as decrepit and unfit for inhabitation, but for many of its residents, it was simply their reality. Over at Wethersfield, a former RAF airfield in Essex, the story was strikingly similar. Here, asylum seekers were housed in temporary cabins surrounded by barbed wire. Green netting had been erected to block public views into the site, reinforcing the sense of isolation. In the first 5 months of 2023 alone, 14 suicide attempts were recorded at Wethersfield. Even those placed in hotels, often thought to be a better alternative, faced dire circumstances, with families living in rooms that were overrun with damp and mould, with ceilings that collapsed under years of neglect. For British taxpayers footing the bill, this makes what was already a bad situation even worse. Not only are they funding an inflated system, but they are paying for one which is fundamentally broken. The root of these conditions lies in the system itself. The government's reliance on makeshift solutions, run-down hotels, aging military sites, and even office buildings was driven more by convenience than care. Sites like Napier and Wethersfield weren't chosen because they were suitable, they were chosen because they were available. Middlemen, eager to capitalise on the crisis, filled the gaps, but at a steep cost. For every pound spent by the taxpayers, only a fraction went towards actual improvements in living standards. The system governing asylum accommodation isn't just broken, it's opaque by design. At its heart lies a tangle of contracts, middlemen, and bureaucratic oversight that makes it almost impossible to track where taxpayer money goes or hold anyone accountable when things go wrong. Take the contracts themselves. When the government outsourced them to private companies, they also handed over control of quality enforcement. The Home Office's role shifted from provider to overseer, but this oversight has proven dangerously ineffective. And then there's the subcontracting. Beneath the surface, companies like ClearSprings don't work alone. Instead, they rely on layers of middlemen, firms like Oyo and H&H Hotels, to broker deals with the hotel owners and manage accommodations. These companies add to their own profit margins, inflating costs while creating additional barriers to accountability. One insider described the system as a giant cash cow, where everyone involved takes a cut, leaving little for actual improvements in living conditions. This opacity extends to the contracts themselves. Despite being funded by billions of pounds in taxpayer money, the specifics of these agreements remain hidden behind claims of commercial sensitivity. Even the government's own inspectors are barred from reviewing the contracts, making it impossible to determine whether the firms are meeting their obligations. The real tragedy isn't that the system is designed to fail, it's that it's a system designed for profit, with contractors incentivized to cut costs, and the government unwilling or unable to enforce standards. The result is an environment where the most vulnerable are left to suffer in silence, and all the while, the profits keep rolling in. This isn't just a logistical failure, it's a reflection of a deeper issue: how public funds are used, and who they ultimately benefit. This, of course, isn't the first time that UK has had an issue like this, and you only need to look as far as how things like the COVID government contracts were handled to see that many aspects of British public life are riddled with corruption. At a time when the country faces widespread economic hardship, the cost of asylum housing has become a flashpoint. Taxpayers are footing a £5 billion annual bill, equivalent to an additional half a penny on basic rate of income tax. This staggering expense has fueled public resentment and political debate, with leaders from all sides vowing to reduce the reliance on hotels. But beneath the failures of the housing system lies a broader debate. Should the UK reduce the number of people seeking asylum in the first place? Immigration has long been a polarising issue in Britain, but by 2024 it became a national flashpoint. Over half of Britons believed immigration levels were too high and supported stricter controls. The governments have tried to meet this demand with policies designed to deter asylum seekers, from narrowing legal pathways to controversial plans like deportations to Rwanda. So where does Britain go from here? To address this problem, lots of things need to be done. The first is to find a way to reduce the level of asylum seekers coming into the country. Seeing as most of this issue is being caused by illegal migration, this would be a good place to start, but it's also probably one of the toughest problems to solve. You'd think that being an island would serve as a good barrier against migration, and in many ways this is true. Much of the recent spike in migration has been a choice of the government and has been through legal means. But with small boats, it seems like not much deters people from making the crossing. Even the controversial Rwanda plan, introduced by Rishi Sunak, did little to stop the crisis. And in 2024, the numbers arriving on small boats seem to be higher than the previous year. It seems then, as a starting point, greater cooperation needs to be made with where these people are coming from, particularly France, where the majority of crossings are made. The second problem which needs to be addressed is dealing with people once they have already arrived. It's clear to see that the current solution has many flaws, and the backlog of applications exploding highlights how the system is fundamentally flawed. For many, the solution relies in a return to local authority management, where funds are reinvested into communities and housing standards are held to account. NGOs and campaigners argue that a non-profit approach would not only improve conditions, but also restore public confidence in how taxpayer money is being spent. Yet this would require a dramatic shift in government priorities, one that places people above profit. Migration has always been an issue for some in the UK, even when numbers were significantly lower than they are today. And in the last few years, everyone from the public to the current UK Prime Minister has said these numbers need to come down, yet they simply don't. The reasons for this are of course complex. The UK's ageing population certainly plays a role, but you can't help think that the companies who are directly profiting from the crisis may have something to do with it. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you've enjoyed this video and you want to support our research, then please consider subscribing. It really helps us out and allows us to produce more videos like this.